Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome back William Lynes. He's a urologist, and his latest Kevin MD article is titled The Four Stages of Suicidal Ideation, A Physician's Experience with Burnout and Self-Compassion. William, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for inviting me back here today.
So you've been on the show multiple times. Your most recent article really tells your story. So let's jump right into that. Tell me, how did your article come together?
Well, I'm a physician, a urologist, as you said, but I'm also a survivor of multiple suicide attempts. I practiced urology for 16 years, and in 1998, I had the unfortunate experience of contracting sepsis after a out-of-country visit and was real sick and was admitted to actually the ICU where I practiced urology. And I was in the intensive care unit for 6 weeks on a ventilator, had a tracheostomy, had all the manifestations of sepsis, and lost 40 pounds, tracheostomy, I think I mentioned. I recovered somehow from that and went back to my practice. But about a year later, I had a snowboarding accident and was in the intensive care unit again, this time with facial fractures and a tracheostomy, and lost 40 pounds. And I recovered again and went back to work. But, Kevin, when I went back to work after these medical events, I wasn't the same. I had problems with depression and anxiety, and I began what I call is a downward spiral into darkness. And it was a combination of these events, severe physician burnout. And then I found out that I was also bipolar with bipolar affective mood disorder. And it culminated in suicidal behavior and thoughts and ideation, and then attempt at suicide on several occasions. I retired in 2003. Now, in regards to my article, I can actually remember the beginning of my suicidal ideation, which maybe I should define it. It's, basically it's a series of intrusive thoughts and preoccupation with death and dying. And I believe that it's not just a single step, but rather a series of steps. And I can remember the first step that I took. I was actually in the throes of this mental illness, and I was walking my dog in our meadow by our house. And I think we can agree that we are all born with certain self-preservation mechanisms and thought patterns. And one of them, I believe, is an aversion to suicide. Really, so often you hear that people, I don't understand why that person would have committed suicide. And I was the same, but at this point that I'm describing, I can remember actually feeling that, and then one moment later thinking in my mind, well, suicide really is not that bad. And I believe that that was a sort of an irreversible first step in the evolution of my thoughts. And in writing this essay, I came up with four concrete steps that I went through and I think are common for the suicidal patients. And they include acknowledgement, which is the one that I described, which basically you accept the fact that suicide is something that you understand. It's acceptance where, in addition to that, you accept the fact that in your own life it would be possibly something that you would understand. And then anticipation is the third step, which is where you anticipate that in your life, if things do not improve mental illness wise, that you would accept to commit suicide. And then, of course, the one that people really talk about, which is action, the last step, which is where you actually plan out and carry out a suicide attempt. So these are, I think, puts in context really what suicidal ideation is. It's a series of steps and evolution and thinking. It's not an all or none phenomenon.
Now, during what you say is your downward spiral, did anyone step in? Did anyone notice this spiral? Or did you notice it yourself during that time? And did you seek help during that time?
Well, right after I went back to work after septic shock, I started seeing a psychiatrist who is actually still my psychiatrist to this day, and that's been since 1998. And he diagnosed me as having bipolar affective mood disorder and began treatment for that. As far as the medical profession goes, I have a very close colleague who I talked to, and he tried to help me, but I was real recalcitrant, really, to therapy. I was very embarrassed about my behavior, didn't talk to people, and I was sort of the school of just work harder and things will get better.
And just to be clear, this downward spiral happened after your two major medical events that you described earlier?
Yeah, I was flying along well, really, until those happened. Those are big events, and they have profound changes that you actually don't realize taking care of many people in that situation. But yeah, after I went back to work, I started having a lot of trouble in doing the things that were required for a practicing urologist.
Tell me about that coexistence between some of these mental health issues and going back to work. In terms of that medical profession, were they supportive or not? Do you think that it could have been compatible at all?
Well, I think in my own case, I didn't have a lot of support, but I blame myself for a lot of that in that I didn't really seek out a lot of help other than my psychiatrist. I had not many people who inhibited me. I did have an experience that maybe be interested in that sort of precipitated my first suicide attempt, where I was planning on going back to work after septic shock, and I had to see my rehab doctor who was writing my off work orders. And I told him that I don't want to go back to work for another month. And immediately there was just a reaction on his face that I could tell he was not happy. And he reluctantly agreed to that plan. At that time, we had paper charts, and I hand carried the chart to my next appointment. And he had written in the chart that Dr. Lynes must go back to work next month without fail. And that profoundly affected me. And it really told me that, at least in his case, and probably in other people's cases, people didn't really understand the degree to which I was suffering. So I don't have any other profound stories of rejection, but certainly in the back of my mind, I felt rejected, and I felt embarrassed about myself.
As you reflect on this journey, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, I attempted suicide 3 times, and finally, with the third suicide attempt in 2003, I realized that in order to save my life, I would have to stop practicing medicine. In my own case, I'm not advocating this for physician burnout and suicidal physicians in general. In my own case, the answer was to retire, and perhaps I could have done that sooner. After my retirement, I was really I call myself a medical hermit. I was so embarrassed and so distraught about my behavior. I really stayed away from the medical profession, didn't go to meetings, didn't talk to colleagues, and so forth. I had trouble even going to medical appointments. And the thing that I'm getting to that I should have done sooner is in 2017, I wrote an essay where I sort of came out about my experience. It's called The Last Day. It's published in the Annals of Internal Medicine. And in that article, in that essay, I chronicle my last day of medical practice and my last suicide attempt. And amazingly, coming out and speaking about my mental health issues and suicide been tremendously cathartic, actually. And I've had a tremendous amount of relief, feeling better about myself. And so that's another thing that I wish that I had done sooner, which is to talk to the medical profession about my problems.
What was the reaction to your essay when you shared your story in the Annals of Internal Medicine?
There's been nothing but positive about it. It was a very popular article, well read. I had many emails. I advertised it on Twitter and so forth, and there was lots of activity concerning it. Even to this day, which would be 6 years later, just the other day, a person mentioned that they read the last day and were moved by it. And that's really been my experience. Uh, I write about physician burnout and suicide, but I also speak about it. And when I do, I get nothing but positive feedback, emails, generally other physicians who are suffering, who ask what they can do. And so it's been nothing but positive.
And let me ask, how are you doing now?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for asking. Something about not having to practice medicine anymore took a lot of relief off of my back. And then like I said, becoming public about my problems has helped. I have a stable psychopharmacy type regime. I've had over 30 electroconvulsant treatments in the past. I haven't had one in probably 10 years. So yeah, I'm doing well, thank you.
So you mentioned that you had to stop medicine in order to get better. So what
Yeah.
was it about practicing medicine that prevented you from healing?
I think it's a lot of things. It's a mixture of my own personality and the profession. My personality was one of total commitment, long hours, taking everything very seriously. The the profession itself demands that. We had a small urology department of four urologists, and we did help each other to some extent, but I didn't have residents, I didn't have interns, medical students to support me. It was basically I did every surgery, I saw every patient. I took every call, and so it was sort of a combination of my personality. And as I mentioned, I have bipolar affective mood disorder, probably is a contributing factor. And then the profession being such a demanding one, such an important one, such a noble profession. And I took that very seriously. And combination of that in my own case was life threatening and required me to retire.
Whenever we hear a physician attempt to commit suicide, a lot of us ask, is there anything that we could have done? Is there anything we should have noticed? So tell us, what kind of signs and symptoms should we be looking out for to make us concerned that, hey, this physician needs some help?
Well, I think some pretty obvious ones. I mean, physicians are, they're people who come to work every day. So people who are calling in sick a lot, who are missing appointments, who are missing meetings, of course, and every physician in the situation is different. I didn't do any of those things, but 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 things that can be a warning sign are patient complaints, lawsuits. These are some of the signs of mental health issues in practicing physician's life.
Any symptoms that the physicians themselves should be on the lookout for to make them think that, hey, I may need some more help?
I think the big thing is not finding joy in your practice. I was a very happy practicing physician, very proud of my practice, very active in the community, in my church, and in me, the signs were in terms of signaling to myself were difficulty in doing those things and not having joy, not having enjoyment with the things that I generally did. I have a trouble sleeping all my life, but I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I had a night call became rigorous, demanding, not enjoyable at all anymore. Long surgeries became things that I had anxiety associated with. So in my own case, those are some of the signs that I came across.
We're talking to William Lynes. He's a urologist, and his Kevin MD article is titled The Four Stages of Suicidal Ideation, a Physician's Experience with Burnout and Self-Compassion. William, tell us some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Well, specific to this essay that I wrote, I think that we should think of suicidal ideation, which again is intrusive thoughts and preoccupation with death and dying in the suicidal patient, sort of in a different manner. I think we tend to concentrate on, are you having acting out action? But it's really, if you think about it, it makes sense that it's an evolution because we begin with self-preservation feelings about suicide, which are one of avulsion. And you have to evolve past that to a point where you accept it, you acknowledge it in your own life, and then you anticipate in the future committing suicide, followed then by action. So I think these steps are identifiable, and perhaps in mental health therapy, they would help with early recognition of suicidal ideation and allow earlier intervention and hopefully more successful intervention.
William, thank you so much for sharing your
Thank you.
story and coming on the show and sharing your time and insight.
Thank you, Kevin.